My name is George English. I'm the Director of Research Through People. We're living in totally unprecedented times, aren't we, with this COVID-19 pandemic? And people ask me, how can tracing our ancestors, family history and genealogy help us now? So we've made this video to share our knowledge and to answer this. And what we're going to do is talk about the sort of disasters that our ancestors lived through. And then I spent a lot of time working with people in my career and dealing with personal and relationships. So I'm going to talk a bit about that and some suggestions and advice, and then finish off with how can family history help us now. And I thought I'd start with this quote, which I think is quite relevant at this time. We are the chosen, called to find our ancestors, to put flesh on their bones and make them live again, to tell the family story and to feel that somehow those who went before know and approve. We are the storytellers of the tribe. So with the stories from the past, how can we use those to help us now? Now, looking at the past, there have been all sorts of major disasters beforehand. Obviously things like wars, plague, famine, the Great Depression as in the 19th century, various economic having an impact on millions of people. And then of course at the personal level there's a whole lot of things. Families, child deaths in the past. They expected quite a few children to die and therefore very often had large families. Poverty, obviously something very hard to cope with, and all sorts of things that affect individuals and families. And then relationships. Relationships are fantastic when they go right, but equally they can be wrong. They can be difficult to manage. And particularly when we're looking back, we're looking at the 18th and 19th centuries, times of enormous social, economic and other changes. The Industrial Revolution. The United Kingdom became the first modern industrialized nation with over 40% of the total world's trade. Tremendous impact that had. People went from the country to the towns and cities where the new jobs were. So the pluses were that there were jobs, there was money. Minuses, working conditions, slums and various other things, upheaval. Health in the past, they had large families, as I said, because many children would die. Many illnesses that are cured now, the contrast is immense. Poverty, there was no social benefits then, no pensions, so people had to make do with very much difficulty many times. Work opportunities for women were limited. Education, schooling only really started in the late 19th century. And the values were different, and we could debate the pros and cons of that, but quite a different time. So let's start with wars, and here's a situation when this person Southgate was killed in the First World War. And what happened was, in fact, someone from Canada got in touch, because on the war memorial in Palmerston, Ontario, was this C.S. Southgate. And they discovered he was actually British, but they hadn't found very much more. Could we help? And what was interesting, we found that in fact he was born in Birmingham in England. He joined a Scottish regiment, the Highland Light Infantry, and he was killed on the 15th of July 1917 in a place called Nieuwpoort in Belgium. Those of you who know a bit about the First World War may have heard of Passchendaele. He was killed in the build-up to Passchendaele. And we found a whole lot of things, but one of the things about the war is records were kept of the soldiers. Now, ironically, the First World War records, the building where they're held in London, was bombed by the Germans in the Second World War. A lot of records survived, but a lot were destroyed. And there's what's known as the burnt records, those that were affected by the flames but survived. And you can see here with Samuel Charles Southgate. It's interesting how his name was reversed at times. But anyway, here his record. You can see the singe marks on the record. But from that we discovered his age, we found his mother's name and where she was living at the time, various other information which was very, very useful in tracking him down. One of the ironic things, we knew his age, so we knew when he was born. Could we find his birth? No, and then we noticed actually that his birth was before his mother married, and we found in fact he was illegitimate and his name was his mother's surname. So anyway, a whole lot of things we won't go into here, but we managed to track that. And what was interesting, we in fact at the Highland Light Infantry, what happened in the First World War, a lot of cities raised their own regiments. So Glasgow raised 3 regiments, including the Tramways Regiment, and Southgate was in that. And that after the war, the Tramways Regiment had a war memorial. Now what was interesting, they had a building which they moved from in 1970s. So he said, where's the war memorial? And it took a while before we tracked it down to a new museum. And there's the war memorial with Samuel Southgate's name on in Glasgow. So war, tremendous impact. Plague through the centuries. You will have heard of the Black Death in the 14th century. Killed half of Europe's population, of all the countries in Europe, half the population. The Mayflower, it's the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower this year. When they got there, they managed, the local tribe was the Wampanoag, who they built friendly relationships with, and the Wampanoag were very helpful in saving them. The Wampanoag had previously had 3 years called the Great Dying, from 1616 to 1619. This plague wiped out whole villages. They wouldn't have known what was happening to them, and they wouldn't have had a cure for it. After the First World War, millions killed. The Spanish flu in 1918 to 20, there are various estimates of how many were killed, but 20 million plus were killed by the flu. And what happened if a soldier got this? They stuck him on a train with a lot of people back to a camp with a lot of people, passing on the disease. Social distancing was not known and understood at that time. And vaccines, it's incredible how the human race has developed vaccines to counter these things like smallpox, polio, measles. Penicillin, Sir Alexander Fleming, you will have heard of. Absolutely vital to the survival of the human race. And here we are in 2020 with coronavirus. So looking on the local level, child deaths. Let's take this couple, Joseph and Mary Ann Luff. They lived in the East End of London. They married at the Church of St Leonard's in Shoreditch in 1820. And we have a copy of their family Bible with Joseph's own handwriting recording his children. So the first child, Mary Ann Luff, was born in 1821 and christened in St Leonard's Church. Second child, Joseph Luff, was born but died 2 weeks later. William Luff died after a week. Louisa Luff died after 10 days or so. Julia Luff survived for 8 months, but the next 4 children died before the age of 1. And then Eliza Luff was born, and she survived. Alfred Arthur was born in 1830. He survived. Emily was born in 1832. She survived. And Edwin, born in 1833. So at last I've had 4 children after Mary Ann Luff who have survived. But Emily died after a couple of years. Then the next child, Frederick, he died after 6 months. James died the same day. And then twins were born, 2 girls, Lucy and Alice, in 1838. But it hadn't finished there. Eliza, aged 10, died of tuberculosis, a very common disease at that time. And if we look, the 5 children in yellow were the ones who survived. 8 died. So the first child, Mary Ann, 5 children died, and then Alfred survived, Edwin Henry, and ironically the last 2 twins survived. But tremendous pain for the parents. How do you cope with that? And we've got a number of letters that passed down through the family, and the short answer is faith. They were very religious, and if God wills it, and so forth. But terrible thing to cope with. Family disaster. Now here's just an example. George Gore dies age 47 in Loch Lomond in Scotland. Loch Lomond, what's all that about? Age 47, drowning. And we found a newspaper article at the time, and here's the fatal boat accident. Him and another man were taking a cow across on a boat in Loch Lomond to an island, Inchmurrin, and on the way back the cow leapt out of the boat. George was holding the rope, got pulled overboard and drowned. So terrible. I mean, George had 8 children, ranging from late teens down to age 4. So his wife is left with that to cope, no breadwinner. And so these are the sort of things our ancestors lived through. Now, I've spent a lot of time in my career working with people in all sorts of organisations, large and small, public and private, working on improvement, working on the management of change. And I've done a lot of personal stuff, personality analysis. Very interesting. Most people are more aware of their areas for improvement than they are of their strengths. It's our strengths that enable us to achieve things, and very often our areas for improvement that hold us back. I've done a lot of counselling with people. I've done stress management and obviously the stress in the current situation, teamwork and those sort of things. So here are some things that I've picked up over the years. And the first thing is say set goals, set clear goals and measure progress. An obvious thing would be losing weight. You know, so how much are we going to lose and measure your progress as you go. Now, managing change, what's interesting, it's what we do at the moment that's causing us perhaps to be overweight. So we need to unfreeze the current behaviour and make the change. Now, very interesting with people being in lockdown at home. A lot of people are exercising or going out for walks and so on and so forth. Be very interested to see what happens when we return to normal, because the key thing is the third phase, to refreeze the new behaviour, make it part of our routine so we keep at it. We don't just do 2 weeks and then we let it go. Flow experiences, I think, are very useful experiences. Have experiences which make us lose track of time. There's all sorts of things we can do, relaxation, there can be meditation, techniques like that and so forth. It can be reading a good book, it can be hobbies of all sorts. It can be family and friends that we meet and have fun with and so forth. A lot of things, but that thing that takes our eyes off time, we lose track of time. Prevention is a very good way of thinking. How can we prevent things going wrong? When something goes wrong, have a think afterwards. What happened there? What can we do to prevent it going wrong in future? And that staying positive is so important, and being fit and healthy with it. I remember one person that they'd been injured. They got back and said, no idea how good it feels to be really fit. And it helps us deal with all sorts of other things. I've deliberately put the word self-esteem in here. Now, this is what happens when we have discovered that we have abilities and talents which we can use. If we work hard at them, we can make them better, probably with other people, etc. Very important in bringing up children. What we want is our children to reach adulthood with a feeling of self-esteem, that they're worth it. And it's something that we build. Now, what's important with children is that they discover that sort of thing. Very important to reinforce that with recognition when they do the right thing, not to fall into the trap of the child throw the tantrum and a couple of minutes later they get a bar of chocolate to appease them. They're learning the wrong things. Children learn what they live. Part of self-esteem is self-discipline. And what we try and do when they're younger is give them discipline to enable them to channel their abilities in the right direction. And I've just put in this avoid negative copers, alcohol, drugs, overeating and smoking. Very easy to fall into that, very easy to think it's a treat, fine in the short term, but it can cost a lot in the long term. And when we do research, we find sometimes the father became an alcoholic and the negative consequences of that. So try and replace these with positive copers. So relationships, this is when people are together. So if we have the family together, we have the mother and father, and there's the relationship between them, there's the children. And how can we make sure we get the positives out of that and try and avoid some of the negatives? Very crucial thing to recognize is that when things go wrong, when we first marry perhaps, people don't understand each other very well, but they don't understand themselves very well. And this comes up time and again. We hear, unfortunately, about domestic abuse. Very often those people don't realise in themselves that they think they're getting their own way or what have you, but there are other ways of dealing with things that could be so much better for them, quite apart from the other person. So learn to understand more and judge less. Don't jump in. Now, very interesting, there are 3 roles in life we have: parent, adult and child. And relationships are good when both parties accept that. So if there's a parent with child, parent treats the child like that, the child accepts that as a parent. Very often in teenagers, the teenager is trying to be an adult but feels treated like a child. And then obviously when we are adults, that's what we want to do, is be treated adult to adult. And you may have a simple example, you may have, what's the time? Adult to adult statement. If the reply is, time you got a blooming watch, that's parent to child. That's when things go wrong. I find a very useful way of thinking about relationships. When we lose our temper and those sort of things, we tend to revert to childlike behaviour. Now, what's interesting, it's so easy to focus on the person and get uptight. Think about focusing on the process rather than the person. Try and depersonalize things so you can talk objectively and constructively about what's going on. Recognition is so important. When someone does something right, recognize it, because it's not only a nice thing to hear, well done, thank you, but it says the person has noticed what's done. And you should be recognizing at least 5 out of 10 statements you make to another person. Listening. There's an expression, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should use them in proportion. Let's listen and understand. Use questions. Well, tell me why, etc., etc. Share your feelings, but don't share it in an angry sense. Say, well, tell me how you felt when I did that sort of thing. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. And keep learning. We're always learning, and we can always do better. Don't think we know it all. Okay, so to finish up, let's think about how that channels into family history. Now, the great thing with family history, particularly during this COVID-19 situation, let's find out as much as we can about our ancestors, as far back in time, grandparents, great-grandparents, and not just when they were born, married and died, but where do they live? What jobs did they do? What sort of conditions did they live in? And very interesting with elderly relatives, they've got memories going back not only through their lifetime, maybe 70, 80, 90 years, but they would have met people who were born in the 19th century, maybe 150 years ago. This is an ideal time to get their sort of memories and stories, the juicy bits that put flesh on the bones and bring the ancestors to life. Now, I mentioned a number of things, but flow experiences are particularly useful here. Focus on the process, not the person, because when we have our ancestors, we can focus on them as opposed to necessarily the other person and talk about their feelings. Now, a very key part of genealogy is saying, what is the evidence for that? We live in a social media world where there's all sorts of uninformed opinions out there, where that's before you get to the fake news and the deliberate lies. So don't just get an opinion from someone else. What is the evidence for that? Because what we want to do is be informed, objective and balanced. So often what we hear is uninformed, subjective and very one-sided. Now, it's interesting with our ancestors, what we can do is say, well, let's imagine we were these 19th century grandparents, great-grandparents. There's the man as the breadwinner. Important, they say, for the man not to show emotion and his feelings. There's the woman at home, full-time job plus bringing up the children, looking after the house and so on. Talk about what that's like, that depersonalized situation, and then maybe we can talk about, well, how does that apply to us today? So understanding the feelings about the people and events. And we've got our children. We don't want to overburden them with things, but quizzes can be very useful. I've just done one for my grandchildren. I did 5 questions for the First World War, 5 for the Second World War. 1 or 2 fairly easy ones, but 1 or 2 thought-provoking, like what was a Mulberry Harbour? We can use that to help discuss things, etc., at the right sort of level. And there's this expression, who do you think you are? We want to try and move from who we think we are to who we know we are. So thanks very much. I hope you found some of that helpful. We find family history so interesting, and if we can help you to find out more about yours, and that's great. The way we work, we tend to have, say, you send us some information, we'll have a look at it, a free consultation, and then we come back with the options that we suggest. And typically we have a gold, silver and bronze package, because what we want to end up is with you knowing how much it will cost and us knowing how far to go with our researches. So there's the contact details. We've got an introductory discount at the moment, just quote Explore One, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.